Welcome everyone on this slightly sunny Saturday morning. This is episode 5 of the Naked Architect workshop series. There will be a bit of a subtext to today's discussion as well, which is to do with consultants and practicalities of running a project. But in general, we'll just be speaking more about the process and this particular project here. So I might start today it's an interesting story how you guys got in contact with each other. So I just thought perhaps Jane or Andrew, if you'd like to talk about how you found your architect Michael for this project.
I think I drove past Pleasant Road and saw our builder 77 project and thought, oh, that house kind of looks quite nice and that's a builder. Then so we Googled him and found that he's collaborated quite a fair bit with Michael on this sort of a design and build concept. So we looked up, and then Andrew looked up Michael's website.
Yeah, that's right. And then we just liked the style of Michael as well. So there was a big practical benefit why we went with Michael. We didn't want to go through the process of having an architect and then tendering out that design to a number of builders, getting multiple quotes back. We just thought that would be a bit drawn out for us. We didn't like the idea that an architect would build to our budget, but then when a builder looked at it, he'd have a completely different number in terms of what he thought it would cost to build that. We needed the cost certainty and the time certainty, so we really liked the idea that Michael, and actually the other guy's Michael too, the builder, so that Michael had worked together on some projects before, and so when this Michael would present a concept, we would get an exact dollar amount for how much it would be to build that right from day one. So that was a really big selling point. The certainty.
We kind of had a time frame to work towards as well, didn't we? Because we kind of really wanted to get it all done within a year, because we bought the house the same week I found out I was pregnant with Clara, so we kind of needed things happening quite quickly.
Yeah, and the style was really important. So if you go onto any number of architect websites, you'll see they all have pretty different styles. I think if you find someone who has a style that's very similar to what you would like and you can see yourself living in a house like that, I think just makes the process so much smoother, because you're already sort of in sync, if you like, from that perspective. When they have material selections and things, you're like, yep, you know what, that's exactly what I like, because you've seen their stuff, it appeals to you, rather than starting with someone who's quite far away from where you are and then having to work them back in terms of what you actually like. So that was another big influence for going with Michael.
And I certainly found that in that process, like often Michael would bring us a sample of a floorboard and be like, yep, that's exactly it. There's not, not much agonizing over options and things. Yeah, and I I want a pop of colour for the laundry, and then he brings the tile and I'm like, yep, that's it. Yeah. And so the taste is quite similar. Yeah. But we did also, just going back to the question, so after we contacted Michael, and then we actually got Michael to come in and have a bit of a chat, didn't we?
Yeah, and actually have a look at this place.
And a little bit of an interview and stuff
like
that. Yeah,
I think I met, the meeting with you was before you bought this place. You were looking at buying this place, wasn't it? Yeah.
And having that conversation, and meeting the architect in person, you also get to know whether you click with them or not, and having whether your personality gel, because you're going to work together for a long time, and this person is going to know a lot about how you live.
Yes.
Like how many pairs of shoes you've got, how you do your ironing. He's going to know a lot of things about you, so you really want to be able to connect well. I think being able to have a few laughs together and all that is important.
Yeah,
so agreed. The personality part of it. And in fact, I think we didn't actually ask. We basically just met Michael and went, that's it. We didn't actually, look for another architect for another quote or anything like that. We just pretty much went with him. Yeah.
And Michael, is that a way you've worked before with a builder and negotiated, so it's been known from the beginning?
Yeah, so when I started my practice, I guess you're kind of trying to find work and you're looking at different ways to find work. So quite early on, I felt like, yes, this is a potential way to sort of work with a builder and offer a service that is a little bit different for certain projects. So 77, we did a house just around the corner called Tunnel House. That was the first one. And then this was the second one, and we've done a few others since then. But I think depending on the project and depending on how, I guess, timeline and budgets and all that, it may have benefits to work that way. But we also do tender, because sometimes you get a competitive price and you get that benefit of that as well. But I find that finding a builder is not just about the price points, but again, it comes down to that personality. And that comes with, you can work with that person as well. And we found that connection with 77, but also they're quite enthusiastic about building houses that are just not the normal sort of house. They're looking to find a challenge. They're looking to do something that's exciting, that they can put their name on and be quite proud of. And that kind of draws that kind of nice collaboration between, client, architect and builder.
And when you met these guys and you knew the time frame involved, were you worried about trying to deliver a project in that time frame? Were there any concerns, or was it something you were quite confident about?
Yeah. So usually I am, but no, the time frame you gave us was quite realistic.
It wasn't actually a year.
Yeah.
It was a year of
2 years.
planning, and then
Yeah.
actual buildings the year after.
Yeah, so a
it's
year of
actually
planning, not a year,
sorry.
from start to
Yeah.
move in. Yeah, it was so, and I remember the time I was like, yes, it's definitely possible, so it's fine. But sometimes you do get time frames that are, we want to be in by Christmas or. And it's it's now, and you're like, well, no, that's not gonna happen. And that discussion about time, I think, is something to consider if you're looking to work with an architect. I think it's that sort of triangle, quality, time, and cost. And time, if you have that flexibility, you can really focus on the quality and getting a good price as well. So time's in if you have time, it's good.
So I'll throw a slightly architecty question out there now. Given town planning wasn't required, were there other consultants that were involved in this process, or was it literally a case of these guys came to you and you could just deliver the whole project? Were there other people involved?
Yes, definitely. So we, if there is town planning involved, we usually bring in a planning consultant if needed. But from the beginning, we had a land surveyor come out, so they will come out and map the site, the neighbours, and the terrain and all that, which is quite important. And then that was probably the only consultant we needed to get through design and detail design. And then after detail design, we had in the building surveyor, the engineer, the energy rater. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like land surveyor, building surveyor, energy assessor, and structural engineer.
Yes, correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
so would you say they're the fairly standard consultants on every project?
Yeah, definitely. They're the the must-haves, and then you have your additionals depending on the size and the brief of the project. Yeah.
And in terms of managing those consultants, is that something that you coordinate as the architect?
Yeah, so we find that it's best for us to get the quotes and work with people we've worked with before, because there are lots of different qualities and styles of consultants out there. So we go out and get the quotes that work with get quotes from guys that we've worked before, and then we manage that as well. But we usually get a few quotes to sort of get a price point that we make sure that it's fair, and then we manage it.
Okay. Well, that's, dealt with a few of the dry issues. I guess what is of interest then, it was touched on briefly in the tour, but obviously you met Michael, you had an idea that you wanted to buy this house, you had a builder in mind. What was your brief? Was that derived from the house once you knew you had it? You sort of worked out what you didn't like about it and what you wanted to do? Or was that something that developed along the way?
We had a pretty clear brief from the outset in terms of what functional requirements we had for the house, plus the style of the house as well. So we actually gave Michael a brief it wasn't a brief document, but it was a brief, a not particularly brief about all our functional requirements. You know, we need 3 bedrooms, we need 2 bathrooms, we want a main living space, we want an additional living space. These are the styles we like, these are the styles we don't like. We put in a bunch of pictures. You know, if we've taken a bunch of things from other architects' websites, you know, we love this kind of feel to a house, you know, a lighter feel, not a dark feel, those kind of things. And so I think that was quite good to summarise what we really required, so that Michael had a clear idea of what we wanted.
I was just going to add that we also have the benefit of having the experience of renovating before. So as I mentioned earlier, we actually literally used to live on the other side of Riversdale Road, on Aberdeen Street, so on a long Victorian house. So it was like the worst house on the street, and that was our first house, which we renovated. So having gone through that experience, we had a draftsman for that. We were able to, I guess, get a really good sense of how, and we had our first child there, so we had a really good sense of how we lived as a family, and we knew that we spent 90% of our time in the back room here. And so with this house, we really, really wanted to focus on making this space absolutely perfect, because that's where we spend all our time. So this was a real big part of that brief, to make this space feel you know, lots of light and space, and being able to have that open plan, because I like cooking, being able to interact with the kids while I'm cooking and having to enjoy the garden. So that was kind of a big part of it. But certainly I think having the experience previously, and I think Andrew will add to this, having the experience of working with a draftsman, doing a renovation, and knowing, I guess, you know, knowing the mistakes we made, you know, we kind of learned from that as well.
I'm just gathering that you sort of led the project on the previous project with the draftsperson, perhaps?
We did it all ourselves.
You did it all yourself.
Yeah, there was quite a big difference. So the first project we did, we used a building company, and the building company had an in-house draftsman. It was very different in the sense that we pretty much told them exactly what we wanted to do. We basically drew out the floor plan, and then they just made sure that it made technical sense, you know, like left some space for walls, and the staircases worked and things like that. But we pretty much said, this is exactly how we want the house, down to the layout, down to where the windows were, and then how the house was built was just a function of what we put down into paper. They didn't really have a designer. And, you know, it's a budget thing as well. You know, we didn't have a separate fund for an architect. And so that was all part of that decision initially, and we were quite young, and that's the way it worked at that time. But for this house, we didn't know exactly what to do. We wanted to make sure we maximised this great aspect that we have. We'd also appreciated a few things along the way in terms of how houses worked, and how you know, mistakes you can make. And it's a budgeting question as well, obviously. So putting all those things together, it was quite an easy decision for us this time to say we'd like to use an architect and get the experience they can bring in terms of how the sun works, how the seasons work, light, ventilation, like traffic flow, heating, overall look and feel of the house, binding it all together, all of those things which we didn't have the expertise for, and so we needed some help. And
not just sort of, I guess, like attaching a box to the back of the house, which is kind of a little bit like what we did before. And what we found with the draftsmen was they don't really have a lot of ideas. They kind of follow instructions. And if you say you want a room there or a box there, they'll just add it. Well, you know, with Michael, it's more you give a general idea and he goes away and works on it. So it's quite different. And you know, the draftsman didn't really think about, you know, the angle of the sun or the light, or make suggestions that rather than having slitty windows, you could have big windows or something. So they don't really suggest any of that. Michael's he's taught us now about streamlining things. If you can see, all the cupboards match up in terms of the lines with the door and everything, that this adds on to your perception of space. So now we go to some house and we'll be, I just see the lines. Yeah.
Welcome to my world.
I know, I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's not lined up. Why is that not lined up?
Walk around cringing.
Yeah. No, I'm kidding.
I'm really curious then, Michael, because it sounds like somewhere between extreme OCD and this level of creativity of interpreting a brief and taking all the site conditions and delivering something creative back to the owners. How do you take that brief and come up with those ideas?
Good question. So I guess a bit about the brief. I've had clients where it goes, I don't want to give you too much instructions and just go for it, which is nice. But I remember we had a discussion. I was like, here are, like, if you got images, if you got references, if you got ideas, like, I would like to see them as much as possible, because when I look at a brief, when I look at images or look at sketches, whatever, I'm not just looking at that and trying to replicate it, but it's kind of looking at that and I'm seeing things that are about how you might want to use that space, the functionality, the lifestyle, the feel, the mood of that space. And that helps me interpret when I'm drawing or when I'm designing to say, yes, I think this is heading in the right direction. And it helps me navigate when I feel like I'm sort of off tangent to what the brief is. And then again, before I guess even we go into say how the lines sort of match up and all that sort of extra sort of detail that we obsess about is to work out how functionally these spaces work. So a lot of the strategies that we put in terms of that thinking you were saying, that difference between a building designer and an architect, is that we spend a lot of time of processing ideas that aren't sort of seen in terms of the visual, but sort of orientation. So for example, this window here, we knew that if we can make this open up and light up the whole space and then you can see out, it would really start to resolve a lot of the spaces that were in here previously that were a little bit dark and weren't that nice. And everything just starts to sort of resolve itself. So that was a strategic move to sort of say, focus energy on this, you get that really beautiful room. And then everything as you come into this room feels bigger and better. So it's kind of like that. There's all these sort of, architects I believe are good problem solvers, and this one I felt was like one of the key first problems. If we can knock this over, the sort of other domino sort of effect of little problems sort of start to resolve itself, and then from there we start to think about the design, how it feels, and then we bring that brief and that feel and that sort of ideas back in.
And how do you communicate those ideas back to Jane and Andrew so that they can understand your vision and can trust you to go to that next step? I mean, is it through discussion or are there other aids? Or?
Yeah, like both. Look, a lot of hours, which is good fun, but we spend, I've got the previous design sort of concept plan package there for people to look at, but basically a lot of what I've said, I guess, is to do with the ideas that you don't see. So it's the thinking behind it. So we spent a lot of time talking about how we came up with this floor plan or this design and how it works and the benefits of that. So for example, that eave there, we've designed it so that it's just the right dimensions, that it cuts out the summer sun, so you don't get the light coming in and get the sort of greenhouse effect, and it lets in the winter sun. So that is a benefit of doing that. And from there we go through that process of why we do that. We do a presentation, we have a 3D model, we do a lot of diagrams, we do a lot of plans, and it's usually maybe a 2-hour sort of sit down or so, and then we fly through the model. So it's a lot of discussion at the very beginning to why this is the idea that we should be focusing on.
It's a bit of an education for the client as well. Like we learnt a lot through that.
It sounds like you were already very educated clients. So
they were.
About the building process, but maybe not about all that detail in terms of why he's done it that way. So it's quite educational for us for him to show us reference points and say, I'm creating a large picture window here. If I broke up that window with a wall there and a wall there, then you can see how the view would be quite restricted. Here's an example. On the other hand, here's one in real life, another house, of how you can see it really captures it, and you've got that great aspect. So it educated us about why he was doing that, and then we understood why we needed to invest in such amazing windows because we're trying to achieve this ultimate outcome. So it was a good learning for us, and there were many learnings like that along the way. Yeah.
And speaking of investing,
yes.
Well, maybe I'll phrase this another way.
Sure, go for it.
This arriving at the right design to suit the brief and requirements and levels of practicality, like shading of windows. Did you come up with one option, or have you explored a few options and then decided which one? And how do you then balance that against the right budget for the project as well?
So I guess we can sort of go through. so I guess the brief could be fulfilled in many different ways. Yeah. So initially when we started the process, there was a discussion of adding a new extension. So the extension now you see is from that point to that point, so it's relatively small. Yeah. And we did the whole concept for that, and we had the builder cost it all, and it was basically in terms of brief, it met what we were looking for, but it was over budget, and it's a process that I think is important to do early on. So we spent a lot of energy working out what, if we were to match this brief, this is the budget that it will need to be, and then there was a discussion about whether we increase the budget, or whether we try to find ways to build that in terms of staging. And then after going back and forth a lot, Andrew Jane came back and go, look, I think we actually might want a small house now. Yeah, and I think that's great, and this is why we've got this house here, and the extension is small, but it's more focusing on how to reconfigure the interiors of the existing house. And I think that's great because when you start a project, you've got a brief and what you want, but then there's always balancing that budget. And it's through this design process of seeing what's possible, why we're doing things, that you might go, actually, we don't need to do all that, and we can get it back on budget and do this, and start thinking about spaces beyond just what we initially thought it to be, but maybe spaces that we can share. Yeah.
And Andrew, was that a difficult thing for you as the owners and the clients to think about a whole change of the space, and that you didn't need all that space, you could actually rework part of the existing house to still get everything you needed? Was that hard to change that thinking?
It wasn't too hard. I mean, our budget was quite restricted. Like, we had a number that was it. And so when we had the initial design, we tried to work it back, basically, to try and make it fit the budget, but there wasn't a way of doing it without compromising the inherent design of what he was doing. So we did need to go literally back to the drawing board, and this is completely different to the initial concept. But if we went back to the brief, we had our key requirements. We wanted 3 bedrooms, we wanted 2 rooms, and that's what the second concept was. So even though it was more scaled back, I think it's definitely more valuable to have less spaces, but ones that you'll use a lot and all the time, and that you can put more money into if it works for your situation, rather than having a 5-bedroom, 5-bathroom, 5 common room house, where you might not even go into some rooms some days. Every single space in this house we utilise every day to the max, and that works for us, and it means that we could probably do each room better than if it was more, but with less quality.
And it sounds like you were very fortunate on this project through, deliberate design, to have the builder engaged throughout, or rather accessible throughout, I should say. So in terms of finding out that first option wasn't affordable, at what point did that happen? Was it straight after the original design? You gave it to the builder and asked them to price it?
They'd actually priced it right from the start. We had some budget communication. issues.
So when we work with the builder, we try to price before we even have the first meeting with the client. So we get that done, and we knew it was over, but we said, let's just present it and see where we sit. And that was a tactic too. Yeah.
And Michael, if you didn't have the builder, say if it was another project and there wasn't that builder available, how would you get a sense of the cost of the project?
So if we don't have a builder, we use a quantity surveyor, and that'll be another consultant that we'll bring on. So they're cost experts. They break down the house, design in terms of how much each element costs, and we'll bring them on after concept normally. So it's a slightly different process, and then before concept, we will base on our own experience of how much this house may cost, based on perhaps square meter rate or other references from previous projects. Yeah, but I would say that the quantity surveyor is the right approach if you're going down the tender path. But if you're thinking of this is a limited budget, this is it, that's it, we have to work towards this, then maybe it's better to work with builder, because then you can workshop ideas and try to find a way to say, hey, maybe we can shave off 10-5% here, and how we do that. So they bring their expertise not just in cost, but in terms of them as builders and their experience.
So it was useful having them from the start, because as we massaged the second concept down to this, for each change we made, we could see the cost impact of that. So we're going to, I don't think we changed dimensions, but we're going to change this particular material. What's the impact of that? Okay, that's going to knock off $5,000. Okay, cool. And then we could see all the variations and how they impacted the bottom line.
And I guess, given especially you had experience previously in building, Did it surprise you how many people are involved in going down sort of the architectural side of building a project in terms of consultants, or was that similar to your previous project anyway?
I think it was probably similar, although with the other project I think they engaged more directly, or they had an in-house version of that. So there may have been sort of 5 odd consultants we engaged, but it was quite seamless because we weren't working with them. It was either Michael or the other Michael working with those consultants. So they might just say, "I'll make your house available, we're going to do a soil report." Okay, cool. We didn't have to just had to engage them and pay the bill. That was kind of it, really. Yeah.
And I'm quite curious, this might be an off-the-record question, but in terms of the cost of going to a building company versus using an architect and a builder,
Sure.
were they vastly different costs?
We didn't actually quote this one for just going to a builder.
Okay. Yeah.
So I don't really know what the answer to that question would have been. But certainly from a cost perspective and consultants, I wrote some numbers down because I would have been very interested to know this before I started. But for the land surveyor, an approximate.
Yeah.
The land surveyor was for our project $2,000. Yeah. The engineer was $4,000, but again,
there's not much here.
There's not too much to do. The soil engineer was $500. A building surveyor was $2,000, and the energy rater was $500. So altogether, if you for our project, it was about $10,000 for additional consultants that we had to add to the building cost and the architect cost.
And I guess then probably talking more about the architecture and the end result, somewhere between this initial concept, working out the right design, working out it's on budget, there comes in a level of detailing of the project itself. Like I've got my architect eyes on and I can see there's no cornices, skirtings, everything's very simple, very elegant, very neat. At what point does that sort of level of detail come forward in a project? And is that something you had asked for, or is that more something Michael has brought to the project?
You did mention, the examples you showed me did have these kind of details.
Yeah. So you probably just picked up on that.
Yeah.
That's what they want.
Yeah. But there's I guess kind of maybe when you're choosing the architect as well, and the example you showed, there was similarities in this kind of finish. And then, but in terms of working out the details, we do that in the working drawing stage, documentation. But obviously, as we're designing, we're thinking about this as well. So we knew that to achieve this kind of space in the field where the focus is on just the view, because this space is actually very simple. The concept is very, very basic, but the power of this concept and the is felt with the details that you can apply to it. So what I'm sort of trying to mean by that is by keeping everything else quite seamless and clean, your focus is on the window. And then when you focus on the window, all the top tracks and bottom tracks and side tracks are recessed and hidden away. So those kind of little details add to that effect. And then those kind of details also enhance and are driven by the initial concept we had. So we bring all that in during working drawing stage.
And I noticed you didn't mention in terms of consultants things like lighting designers, interior designers, maybe furniture selectors. I mean, how does that work between the team that helps build this? Who looks at those aspects? Is that something that is a dialogue, or is that something that you take in hand? Yeah,
so we do a lot of those in-house, but I've worked on projects where the clients have requested a lighting designer or interior stylist, and that's fine as well. We work with them, but generally we do that as well because we think that's part of the concept. So the way the lighting works to the space is actually really important. So we like to take care of that. When it comes to interiors, like the wall, the colours, the cabinetry, we do all that as well. But it's not uncommon to have that as a consultant, and maybe even a service engineer for the AC or the heating or that as well. But at certain projects, especially when we're working with builders, we tend to be able to manage that quite easily.
And Andrew and Jane, is that something you were heavily involved in, things like choosing the colours, materials, or was it more a case Michael just came up with the right tiles and that was it? Was it a stressful part of the project? Or?
No, but we love this stuff though.
Yeah.
That's like, we love picking tiles and picking carpets and
taps
where, and we're a little we're little nerds. We kind of read up about Growy and all those sort of things. But I think we did give you know, Michael the brief of roughly the palette we like, which is kind of his palette anyway, and kind of the way we dress. Black, white, timber, grey. It's very neutral. But that was also because we flipped through a lot of magazines, and I did a little bit of what do you call it? Like a mood board. Like I cut out lots of pictures of things I like for every single room, and kind of get a good sense. And then as you start to do a bit of that sort of research, you start to develop your sense of what you really like. And I think I still have that folder somewhere, but it really helped, I guess, shape our sense of style. And this house is very different from our previous house in terms of the style. So much more, clean lines, no cornices, very simple in the back room.
So that was something you did together before you even spoke to Michael, and it helped you determine the vision of what you wanted to live in.
Yeah. But it's also quite interesting. Like we love texture, materials, timber. So you know now you know the cladding, all these kind of subtle hints of texture for us sort of works really well. But we like you know the feeling of floorboards and the warmth as well. So it's not too. The house is not too masculine and dark, but at the same time light and warm and homey.
Some selections we didn't have much to say at all. Michael brought us this floorboard, and I thought the floorboard discussion was going to take forever because we're quite particular. But that's the one. So that took literally 10 seconds. But then other things like the joinery that took forever. Like it took a really long time. Sorry, it took a really long time.
Pantry design. You guys have to have a look at the pantry.
But in terms of materials, like we
it took so long.
like you know we go out to the joiner. And look at all the things they had, all the material selections, whether it's the bench tops, the cabinet. Like there's been countless hours spent thinking about these particular materials, and we got really involved in this stuff. But then some other things like the tile. Again, I thought we'd need to spend days in tile shops, but he brought us one tile. We used it for the whole house, and
the
it was over.
That was just perfect. Yeah. But it was like, I mean, again, everyone's different. But we really wanted to get the kitchen joinery right. So we actually thought about, I actually went to have a look at my kitchen and looked at the stuff that I had, and actually sat down and worked out, I need a drawer for all my baking things, I need a drawer for these kind of cutlery, I needed a drawer for all my Tupperware, and I actually worked out how many drawers I needed, how wide I needed them to be, and wanted a drawer for my pots. So I actually worked everything out and then gave those specs to Michael, and then so basically, when we actually drew it all up, you're like, everything has a space. And that's kind of how we live as well. We like having things in the house where everything has a home, so that, again, the house doesn't look cluttered and it's easy to keep it neat and tidy. And then the pantry as well took
a lot of changes.
Several drawings and changes, and the
version
fridge
52.
the right space, right? Because it's not a big space. You have a look at it. It's not a big space. But we maximized it, and in the end, that final pantry design actually came from my mother, and that's her dream pantry. So, and that wasn't the original design, but it was her tip that we changed it to this, and it just works so well. So it's got the microwave in there, the rice cooker, everything fits, and you get to put it all away when you want to tuck it away, so the kitchen looks nice and neat for you guys today. But the other thing as well, like materials, we also were quite fortunate to have another friend who was renovating. So she put us onto this material for the bench tops called Decton, which is new to Australia but hasn't been in Europe for like the last 20 years. It's composite porcelain. On the black side is black leather finish. This side's the white matte finish. And apparently it's stain proof, scratch proof, fireproof, everything proof. So you can literally take out an oven tray, hot roasted tray, and you can put it straight on and nothing happens. Or a hot pot and nothing happens. So she put us onto this material. We showed it to Michael, and we loved it. So it's some of these things you kind of get lucky with.
That's actually a really interesting perspective, which is other people outside of you as the clients or owners, the architect, other consultants. So speaking to friends, family, and getting feedback. Is that something you did through a lot of the project, or is that just particular things like the pantry that were quite had
just
to be
that
just
particular
right.
friend was renovating and has taste similar to us.
Yeah.
Really, I think. Yeah. Because otherwise we were just going to go down the usual Caesarstone sort of track. But yeah, we fall in love with Decton. But yeah, and I think the materials, did a bit of research ourselves about the difference between 2-pack and laminate and how far laminate has come, and obviously cost differences as well. So and we like the laminate with the texture, so that kind of worked really well for us with the black and all that, and then obviously researching tapware and
hours.
and it's just so much fun when you find the things that you like and at a warehouse price. So.
Well, I might just ask one more question before we open up to the floor. It sounds to me from this discussion today that there was a lot of collaboration between everyone involved, and great having the builder on board as well, because that sounds like that just streamlined the process. You could get sort of quite definite answers. But it does sound to me like you guys, I'd say, lucked out, but maybe you were just very smart in picking the right architect. Do you think you would have got the same outcome if you had chosen a different architect, and that it would have worked as seamlessly? Don't know.
It's hard to say.
You might have ended up with a better house. Just kidding.
Pretty good chance.
Well, I think we might end this part of the session now, and I'm sure there'll be questions available if you want to grab any of these guys while we're having some coffee and cake. I'd like to say thank you very much to Andrew and Jane for letting us into your house, and for Michael for taking the time to come back and revisit. And thank all of you as well.